Young folks, old folks, everybody come to Kids Club and have a lot of fun. Please check your chewing gum and raisins at the door, and we'll tell you Bible stories that you never heard before. Hello, children. I'm Pastor Ted. Get ready. I'm going to read the Bible. You're going to hear a story. This is the story about Joseph and the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember how Joseph had a coat of many colors and long sleeves made by his father Jacob. And Jacob and Leah and Rachel had eventually 12 sons. And Joseph, one of those sons, had a dream, two dreams actually. In one, all of the sheaves of grain were bent towards him in the center, and the stars in the sky were focused on Joseph in the center. He told his brothers about these two dreams, and they interpreted these dreams to mean that all the brothers would bow down to Joseph. Did that make them happy? Not at all. They were jealous and envious. They didn't like the fact that their father Jacob doted on Joseph. They didn't like the fact that Joseph was one-upping them by making himself more important than they were through these dreams, and so they plotted to kill Joseph. But instead of killing Joseph, they sold him into slavery. They sold him to some Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt, and there they resold Joseph to a man named Mr. Potiphar. Mr. Potiphar was a policeman, and he directed the guards, kind of like our chief of police might. And he was directly appointed by the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh is the king of Egypt. So, Joseph is now a slave for Potiphar, but Potiphar notices that Joseph is very skilled. He's really skilled at managing money. Now, you children, once in a while you have some money, but let me tell you that if you learn how to save your money, how to spend your money wisely, that is a skill that we all want to have, and people in business, people in management love trusting their money to someone who manages it well, and that was Joseph's skill, and Mr. Potiphar promoted Joseph to become the manager of his entire estate, all of his income, his expenditures, and became the boss of all the workers. So Joseph the slave is now the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. Well, Mrs. Potiphar is watching Joseph out the window. Mrs. Potiphar is lusting after Joseph. And so on one day when Mr. Potiphar was away on a business trip, Mrs. Potiphar sends a message to Joseph that the sink in her bathroom is plugged up. Would Joseph please come and fix it? So Joseph shows up. He's got his toolbox and his pipe wrench. And she says, put away that pipe wrench, Joseph. I want you to make love with me. Oh, no, I can't do that. Oh, she says, Mr. Potiphar, he's away for the whole day. He'll never find out. No, says Joseph, I don't commit adultery. I am loyal to Mr. Potiphar, and I'm going to leave right now. So Joseph tries to run away, and she grabs onto him. And she grabs onto his jacket, and she pulls one way, and Joseph pulls the other way, and the jacket comes off, and Joseph runs out of the house. Well, is Mrs. Potiphar happy about this? No way. How can she connive to punish Joseph? She thinks, aha, I'll blame this on Joseph instead of blaming it on me. So when Mr. Potiphar comes home, she shows him the jacket and says, your servant, your CFO Joseph, had come in here and tried to seduce me. Oh, no, says Potiphar. Is this true, Joseph? What she says? Joseph says, no, what she says is a lie. And then Potiphar has to decide who's telling the truth, Mrs. Potiphar or Joseph. And Mr. Potiphar says, I trust my wife. Joseph, you are guilty of sexual harassment. You are guilty of creating a hostile work environment. And for that, you're going to prison. So, Joseph is taken off to prison, but in prison, the warden discovers what a good manager he is, and he says, Joseph, I know you're a prisoner, but would you please take charge of the prison and manage it for me? Sure, said Joseph. Well, time passes. Mr. Potiphar dies. The Pharaoh dies. And a new Pharaoh comes onto the throne of Egypt, and this new Pharaoh does not know anything about Joseph, who's rotting away in prison all by himself. On one occasion, the Pharaoh arrests his butler and his baker, and they end up in jail, and they meet Joseph. Now, the butler and the baker each have a dream, and Joseph says, I think I can interpret those dreams. God sometimes gives me insight to interpret dreams. What are they? So he interpreted their dreams. Their dreams came true. Eventually the butler, not the baker, regained his position of authority in the Pharaoh's household. And one time the Pharaoh complained. He says, I can't get any sleep. I have these 2 nightmares. They keep me awake. Oh, says the butler. Let me tell you about Joseph. Joseph is in jail, but he knows how to interpret dreams. Pharaoh says, send for Joseph. So Joseph is given a clean shave and a bath and some fresh clothes by the warden. And Joseph shows up and he says to the Pharaoh, well, how can I help you? And Pharaoh says, I have these 2 dreams. Oh, they're nightmares. Well, tell me about them, says Joseph. The first dream, he says, is that 7 steers, beef cattle, come walking up out of the Nile River. They're fat. They're going to make wonderful hamburgers someday. But then 7 more lean, scrawny, starving cattle come up and they eat the first ones. And then he says, I have another dream. And in this dream, we have 7 ears of corn, beautiful sweet corn. Just you dip them in butter and they just taste heavenly. But then 7 skinny, scrawny ears of corn grow up and swallow up the first 7. Oh, I don't know. They just worry me, says Pharaoh. Joseph says, I can interpret these, but actually God is going to help me interpret them. First, the 7 fat cows and the 7 luscious ears of corn represent 7 years of prosperity. But those skinny cows and those crummy, unfruitful corns of ear represent 7 years of famine. So let me tell you what we ought to do. Each year during our harvest of the crops and our slaughter of the beef cattle, we will save 20% for the future. And then after the 7 years of plenty, we'll have plenty in the storerooms for the 7 years of famine that will follow. Boy, that's a smart idea, said the Pharaoh. Suppose I put you in charge. So the Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge. In fact, the Pharaoh treats him like an Egyptian. And Joseph speaks Egyptian. He grew up speaking Hebrew, but now he's speaking Egyptian. And Joseph is in charge of all of the economy of Egypt. And during the 7 years of famine, he builds barns and storehouses, and in goes the grain, and in goes the healthy cattle. And then after that, a drought happens, just like we have in California. And year after year, the water goes away, and it won't be long, and we in California won't be able to grow any crops either. And Egypt could not grow any crops. But the famine spread all throughout the Middle East, even the land of Canaan, even the land of Israel, where Jacob and his brothers were living. So when they ran out of food in the land of Canaan, Jacob sends his 11 sons, brothers, to Egypt to see if they can buy some food. And when they show up, Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize Joseph. And Joseph says, "Don't you have any younger brothers at home?" Ooh, they started feeling guilty because they remembered having sold Joseph into slavery. "Do you have a father at home?" "Yes, his name is Jacob." And Joseph says, "I'll give you enough food to get by, but I want you to go back to Israel and bring Jacob, now named Israel, down here so I can meet him." So the brothers do this, and when they get back with Jacob, the father, there's a reunion. Joseph tells them who he is, and he introduces his family to Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh says, "You can make your home in the land of Goshen, and you can thrive on the food that we have put away for this famine." So the story ends quite happily, but here is the most important verse. "You meant evil, but God meant it for good." The brothers ask Joseph for forgiveness. Joseph forgives them, and he says, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." That's the end of the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph story. Young folks, old folks, everybody come to Kids Club and have a lot of fun. Please check your chewing gum and raisins at the door, and we'll tell you Bible stories that you never heard before. Goodbye, kids.